9:27 p.m., May 25, 1955, Blackwell, Oklahoma. We treat tornadoes as mechanical phenomena. Wind, pressure, thermodynamics you can measure and model. We are dead wrong. Because on this pitch-black Wednesday night, a monster descended on the Great Plains and defied the known laws of atmospheric science. It was an F5 wedge that brought unusual electrical activity. As it ripped through the city, the vortex glowed with a blinding, continuous pillar of neon blue fire. 80 city blocks ceased to exist in mere minutes. Gone. Just bare concrete left behind. How does a storm turn into a huge electric generator? What happens when a force of nature defies everything scientists thought they knew? The resulting tragedy obliterated an entire industrial economy, completely baffled the world's top physicists, and permanently altered American civil defense. The blue glow remains the most chilling anomaly of the 1955 outbreak. Most nocturnal tornadoes hide in the rain. They use the darkness as camouflage. This one illuminated its own destruction. Eyewitnesses reported a steady, unblinking light radiating from deep inside the funnel. No flickering, no seconds of darkness between lightning strikes. It simply burned with continuous intensity. Skeptics immediately tried to dismiss these accounts as routine power flashes. They blamed exploding electrical transformers. Power was knocked out across the area as the storm tore through the city. The power was dead, which meant the glow was internal. It kept radiating brilliant light as it violently swept away 400 homes. A rare atmospheric event. It exhibited an extraordinary display of luminous electrical discharge, and thousands of oblivious residents were trapped directly in its path. The morning of May 25th offered no hint of the approaching disaster. It began as a completely ordinary, postcard spring day. The economic engine of Blackwell was humming with heavy industrial activity. Men clocked in for their shifts at the Acme foundry. Workers at the sprawling Hazel Atlas glass plant managed towering white storage tanks. Families went about their daily routines in the surrounding neighborhoods. They trusted the sky above them. But miles to the west, a volatile storm system was developing. Deep in the Great Plains, warmer than average ocean moisture surged rapidly northward. It collided violently with a brutal, fast-moving cold front amid intense atmospheric wind shear. This volatile environment locked an explosive cyclic supercell directly over the region. The atmospheric parameters for extreme violence were maxing out. Meteorologists in 1955 lacked every tool we rely on today. No high-resolution satellite imagery. No advanced Doppler velocity radar. They possessed only early radar scopes and rudimentary weather balloons. They watched the instability indices skyrocket off their charts, which meant the forecasters knew a devastating outbreak was imminent, but they possessed no way to pinpoint exactly where it would hit. The sun set. The temperature dropped. The darkness provided cover for the developing storm. At approximately 9:00 p.m., the funnel touched down in northern Noble County. It was enormous, and it immediately began moving north-northeast toward the city of Blackwell. The vortex was on the ground. The F5 carved a wide trench across the earth, 300 to 400 yards wide, moving with the speed of a freight train but with zero tracks. And it was completely silent to the residents of Blackwell. There were no municipal warning sirens blaring across the residential neighborhoods, no emergency text alerts lighting up phones in the dark. Just the heavy, oppressive humidity of a quiet spring night. The town was entirely blind. They were sitting ducks directly in the path of maximum wind speeds. Speeds officially estimated between 261 and 318 miles per hour. Extreme atmospheric violence that vaporizes wooden structures. How do you fight a threat you can't even see coming? You don't. You just endure it. 9 blocks west of the impending impact zone, a dedicated weather observer named Floyd C. Montgomery stood alone at his storm cellar door. He stared east into the total darkness, and that is when he saw the anomaly. A glowing electrical anomaly near the top of the dark funnel. He explicitly described it as resembling a giant 4th of July pinwheel. It rotated steadily to the right, sweeping over the area like a lighthouse beacon. But it was the blinding color that burned into his memory forever. Deep blue. The exact, piercing color of an industrial electric arc welder. The intensity was so severe, he physically had to look away to protect his injured eyes. Can you imagine staring into that light? A man who studied the sky his entire life looked up and saw something entirely alien. Closer to the industrial sector, the horror was magnified. a young boy huddled desperately inside his grandmother's underground storm cellar. As the vortex approached, he used a wooden broomstick to prop the heavy cellar hatch open just 1 inch. Through that tiny, terrifying gap, he witnessed the sheer mechanical brutality of the storm. He watched the towering white storage tanks at the Hazel Atlas glass plant become entirely engulfed in brilliant flames and electrical sparks. The apocalyptic sight was so surreal that his own neighbors later accused him of lying. But he wasn't lying. The industrial heart of Blackwell was being shredded into metal shrapnel. The Acme foundry was leveled. The glass plant was severely damaged. It never reopened. The economic devastation was absolute. 50 miles away in Stillwater, the raw physics of this blue engine were being scientifically recorded. Professor Herbert L. Jones was actively monitoring atmospheric spherics at Oklahoma A&M College. His laboratory instruments were going completely berserk. The Blackwell storm was generating a steady 20 to 25 rapid electrical pulses every single second. This was not normal lightning. This was an unusual, continuous electrical discharge happening constantly within the vortex itself, a rotating pillar of St. Elmo's fire tearing through a populated area. Alongside destroying physical matter, the tornado was actively discharging extreme electrical energy at a rate that defied contemporary meteorological understanding. It was a machine. At exactly 9:27 p.m., the violent core slammed directly into the eastern half of the city. The Riverside Osteopathic Hospital on East College Street took a direct hit. Inside the facility, medical staff and vulnerable patients were suddenly subjected to the deafening roar of a jet engine. The winds ripped the entire roof cleanly off the building. Total structural failure. The staff instantly threw themselves over their patients, shielding them beneath heavy beds and mattresses in pitch darkness. Shattered glass and wooden debris rained down relentlessly on the exposed wards. The facility was entirely ruined, but the sheer courage of those nurses and doctors kept the casualty count inside that hospital at 0. They became human shields. They held the line. Outside the hospital, the residential neighborhoods faced total annihilation. The F5 core sheared 2-story homes completely off their bolted foundations. 400 separate houses were swept away, swept clean. Another 500 structures suffered catastrophic, unrepairable damage. The extreme mechanical force turned large trees into wooden spikes and twisted vehicles into unrecognizable metal knots. Entire families were trapped in the dark as their homes exploded around them. The disaster caused $12.5 million in direct damage. And this was 1955 money. The glowing blue engine roared relentlessly northward, leaving a wide trench of absolute ruin directly through dozens of residential blocks. Bare slabs. Everywhere. When the deafening roar of the wind finally faded, the nightmare only escalated. The storm passed. But torrential, blinding downpours immediately followed the tornado. This immense volume of water rapidly overwhelmed the local geography. The Chicaskia River broke its banks and furiously overflowed. Floodwaters rushed aggressively into the low-lying sections of eastern Blackwell. The water poured directly into the very underground storm cellars that had just saved hundreds of lives. Desperate emergency responders arriving in the pitch black were forced to wade chest-deep through flooded, debris-choked streets. They had to search for trapped survivors in an unrecognizable terrain of submerged, jagged wreckage. Nature compounded the terrifying wind with lethal water. The infrastructure collapse was immediate. The municipal power grid was utterly destroyed. The Riverside Osteopathic Hospital was in absolute ruins, roofless and completely exposed to the freezing rain, which meant every single vulnerable patient had to be evacuated immediately in the dark. Exhausted rescuers loaded the injured into whatever surviving vehicles they could find. They drove them approximately 35 miles north through the treacherous storm to St. Luke's Hospital in Wellington, Kansas. 280 people were injured in the disaster. The official National Weather Service death toll lists 20 fatalities for Blackwell that night, 19 inside the city limits, and 1 on a farm just north near Bremen. 4 more victims ultimately succumbed to their catastrophic wounds in the weeks that followed. The sheer physical and electrical ferocity of the event left the scientific community completely stunned. Physicist Bernard Vonnegut examined the continuous blue glow and Professor Jones's extreme spherics data. He proposed a radical new explanation, the electrical heating theory. He aggressively argued that the intense electrical discharges actually drove the tornado's updraft, creating a thermal engine of immense power. The world's top meteorologists debated this fiercely. They genuinely believed electricity physically created F5 tornadoes. This single glowing storm was so powerful it rewrote scientific literature for an entire generation. The electrical heating theory remained viable in academic journals for over 20 years. Why did it take 2 decades to disprove this? Because researchers at the time lacked the fine-scale radar technology to observe internal storm dynamics. It took advancing knowledge of convective dynamics and supercell thermodynamics over subsequent decades to leave electrical theories behind. The extreme electricity was a byproduct of intense friction and particulate matter, not the driving cause of the funnel. But for 20 years, the Blackwell F5 convinced science that tornadoes were electrical machines. That is how rare this single event was. The glowing blue tornado eventually lifted near South Haven, Kansas. The terror should have ended right there in the dark. It didn't, because this was a relentless cyclic supercell. The sprawling storm simply reorganized its rotating updraft. 30 minutes after the first tornado lifted, it dropped a second, even deadlier F5 tornado. This secondary vortex slammed violently into the small town of Udall, Kansas. Up to 80 people were slaughtered in their homes. A horrific storm system that crossed state lines to brutally destroy 2 different communities in one night. The sheer, terrifying violence of this specific storm system remains one of the most destructive chapters in Great Plains history. The sun finally rose on May 26th over a shattered Oklahoma region. But the survivors of Blackwell did not wait for federal assistance. They took immediate, decisive action. Blackwell Police Chief George Morgan looked at the ruins of his devastated town and realized the fatal flaw. They had no eyes in the dark. So that exact same day, he recruited a dedicated group of local men to stand watch. He formed the very first official civil storm spotting team in the city. He built a human warning network directly out of the rubble. Chief Morgan maintained that key legacy of vigilance until his retirement in 2003. He changed how American towns protect themselves. Today, a permanent tornado room sits inside the top of Oklahoma Historical Society Museum. Archival photographs and first-hand testimonies preserve the horror of May 25th. Author Ginny Gorson captured the tragedy in her definitive book, Without Warning, ensuring these exact details never fade. Recent documentaries by local news teams continue to interview the very last living survivors. The empty chairs at the dinner tables of 20 families are a permanent part of Kay County's history. The glowing blue F5 took their lives, shattered their economy, and baffled modern science. But it could not erase the dignity of the medical staff who shielded their patients. Look out for each other. Every storm ends.